Yeah, an interesting one today. We've It's one area that you and I have brushed around a bit in our career. It's the equipment program famously focuses on equipment, but equipment isn't military capability. A jet isn't combat air, and it's all very well having these expensive bits of equipment, but unless the pilot is suitably trained for it, you don't get the best out of it. And the trouble is increasingly the complexities of war and the fear factor, the safety, the security, the risks are all completely incongruous with peacetime training. So how do you prepare for war? You and I have looked at simulators in the past, haven't we, about the value of simulators. Some people try to replace live flying with simulators, but it's just not the same.
No, and definitely not the same in your and my day. I mean, the sim in the tornado didn't even have any visuals, which, if you were a night, poor weather aeroplane, I suppose you could accept. If you had to simulate a bird strike, a guy used to go outside with a broom and smack it on the side. That's how sophisticated it was for us. But it was how you could practice wartime flying. You could be shot at, you could have emergencies, you could be put under pressure. But and I know that it's not the same level of pressure as strapping on that aeroplane and doing either a combat mission or even a high intensity training mission like a red flag where the adrenaline is really pumping.
No, and certainly, you talk about the stick on the side, and we used to have it was fixed models, and a camera would move across the top as you were flying it around, and every now and again somebody would stick a bloody spider on it, and so you'd be flying around, and this massive, great spider would be looming towards you. Now that was the only time you ever felt fear, because it just genuinely caught you by surprise. But there was never that sense of jeopardy that there is in the real world, is there? There isn't that the sense of fear. And yes, procedurally, I mean, I'm a huge fan of simulators because when things go wrong, as for both you and I, they famously did, but for another day, you need to know where your hands need to go to deal with the huge number of different emergency drills, what the sequences are, stuff like that. When you're going to deliver a bomb, what you need to make live, and when all those process procedure stuff, getting that locked in your head is a simulator is really good for. But in terms of tactics, in terms of big packages warfare, it just doesn't have the same feel, does it?
No, it doesn't do that. I mean, look on the bright side, Sean. If the alien spider planet ever invades, you're our man. But yeah, it's you do learn muscle memory. So you learn where the switches are. You make the switches, which in peacetime, I mean, I used to be on the nuclear strike roll, so we used to practice, funny old thing, dropping nuclear bombs. It's not something you'd want to do in peacetime. So you can go through all of those mechanical things, but you can't replicate that fear factor. I mean, unless you wire the ejection seat to 20,000 volts when you make a mistake, which was the joke. But yeah, it is. But the problem now is that how do you replicate real worlds? Because the real world is even more complicated now than it was in your and my day. The ranges are greater, the threats are greater. How do you practice against those? You and I know we go to places like Nellis, to the ranges. We even do it in the UK on some of our EW ranges, but they're limited. They only so many hours you can go to them for, and you still aren't firing at yourself. There's a sort of element there of jeopardy. So yeah, how now do simulators try and fill that gap? Plus, you don't want to give away all your tactics by doing them in the live environment, perhaps. So there's that as well.
No, and I think the one thing that I found Red Flag, I mean, you and I, it is one of the best live training environments there is. But understandably, there are still peacetime rules. You still have a minimum distance that you're allowed to get close to another aircraft. There's a whole load of minimum weather, minimum heights, minimum. Understandably, because in peacetime you don't want to be smearing very expensive bodies and equipment across the Nevada landscape. But even so, when you go to war, I famously always talked about the weather in Germany. Always used to be really poor, below minimums. But of course, everybody was preparing for war, so everybody just went, "Look, it's going to be like this when we go to war. We've got to get used to it." So increasingly, there's that dichotomy, I think, between the peacetime need for safety and security and a low risk environment, so you don't lose pilots and aircraft, versus when you go to war, particularly when there's a lot of other aircraft around, ground threats, air threats, you're going to have to do what's necessary, not what the rule book says.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we maybe should do a podcast on this about what a red flag mission looks like. But you've probably got the best part of 60 to 80 aircraft on one side, fighting these never-ending aggressors on the other, and there might be sort of 20 or 30 of them. The hardest thing about red flag, certainly the one you spend the most time on, is getting up to the training airspace and out again because you're having to deconflict and coordinate all those airplanes. Imagine if you could just magic them into the space. And you wouldn't have to all meet there for the same week or 2 weeks. You could do that every day, any day, when you needed to. So yeah, how can you replicate a real combat scenario? And I think it's quite important here. You know, things like the CCAs, the collaborative combat aircraft, that we are now going to see increasingly utilised, flying in formation or certainly in close proximity to you. So these are these smart drones, if you will. You're not going to be wanting to fly those in peacetime. So how do you simulate those in the mix? So yeah, there's some really quite difficult conundrums to fix here.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're very fortunate to have a guest today is that if a viable alternative was to mix the live and the synthetic world in some sort of augmented reality, if technology could keep pace with that, then you could be on your own, but in the middle of World War III. Yeah, we're going to have a chat today with the chief exec of a company called Red6, but Dan Robinson, who used to fly in the Royal Air Force, but also did an exchange on the American F-22, the sort of state-of-the-art American aircraft. So who better place to talk about this from a warfighter's perspective? Right, welcome to this latest edition of the High Ground podcast. One of the challenges in air power is we tend to get fixated about equipment rather than capability and tend to forget that actually capability is a lot more than that. And of course, for military fighter jets, it's also about the pilot in the cockpit and how he translates that really difficult task. Costs a fortune to train them. So we're really blessed today to have Dan Robinson join us. He's the chief exec of a company called Red6, based out of the US. But more importantly, an ex-fighter pilot, uniquely flew the F-22 on exchange. For those who listen and watch and know that F-22 is probably one of the fighter aircraft in the world, and therefore it's a huge privilege to have you talking about how we maximize operational capability. Dan, huge welcome to you.
Thank you, guys. It's very nice to be on the show. I'm sorry it's taken me a while to get here, but looking forward to the conversation.
Great. If we could tee it up initially, I mean, I think what we're going to be focused on is augmented reality. In other words, you know, a blend of live and synthetic. But there's a lot of false narratives around the words that we use here. So it's probably worth starting out because your focus is on more on augmented reality. Can you give us a sort of quick canter through the lexicon of language that we should be using here to make sure that we at least start the conversation in the right way?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question because I think ultimately we need to frame it under the umbrella of synthetic training, and I think words matter. And when we talk about synthetic training, we can parse it. I think traditionally when we talk about synthetic training, we would refer to simulation as sort of the de facto. And then there was the advent of the idea of live, virtual, and constructive. And so to drill down onto that, when we talk about live, virtual, constructive, the way I talk about it, I think it's the correct way, is live is live pilots in live airplanes, virtual pilots in simulators that are connected to pilots in airplanes. And constructive is in essence the same thing. It's an AI generated assets that are constructively generated that are connected into that broader ecosystem such that when a pilot's flying around in an airplane, they look down their sensors and scopes and they see entities out there. They think the aircraft sensors think there is something to interact with. I made a bet 8 or 9 years ago when I started really studying the problem associated with training. You sort of talked about it right at the beginning, but I identified it in the UK when I was flying over there. When I just thought it was because we were kind of the poor old Brits, so there was a scarcity of training at frequency, relevancy, and scale. Right? We didn't get enough of it. We didn't get it at scale, and we weren't training against relevant threats. When I came to the US and I started flying the Raptor, I thought all my problems would be solved. It turns out it's exactly the same over here. Right. So I started studying the idea of training in 2017, really with a deep dive into LVC. And it struck me that LVC was the only way we are going to solve the training crisis of the future. At a very high level, you have a divergence of supply and demand, right? So a massive demand signal, a chronic undersupply, and that delta is getting bigger and bigger. The problem with LVC is it kind of worked in the beyond visual range environment, but as soon as you sort of transitioned into that 15-mile looking out of the window, putting the proverbial gum shield in, we're going for a fist fight, there was nothing there to see. And there was nothing there to see because there was no way of putting digital content into the field of view of the pilot and having it behave in a manner commensurate with a real pilot flying a real airplane. So when I started to look into that problem, I started looking at the world of mixed reality. And back to the core of your question. Um, Virtual reality pioneered by Palmer Luckey with Oculus, right? We put a headset on and we're in an entirely virtual world. Clearly, it wouldn't make any sense to put that onto a pilot's head and have them flying a real airplane. So what we need to be able to do is blend the real world with synthetic digital content. And so augmented reality used interchangeably with mixed reality is really the technology that we focused on at Red 6 as the enabling solution for this broader LVC ecosystem. But the problem with augmented reality until we came along was that it was fundamentally an indoor solution only. So you could put a headset on and I could sit in a room and I could put a pink dinosaur on your table and make it jump up and down. But who cares, right? As soon as you stepped outside, AR didn't work for a number of reasons, which we can dive into if you wish. And so all of our engineering efforts really were focused on not just making AR work outside, but in the most dynamic of environments. And the bet I made was if we could unleash the power of AR outdoors, now we have a gateway into a synthetic training world. And it's akin to having a paintbrush. Now I view it really as a portal into the worlds. The next question I asked myself was, okay, so what does that mean? And now we can go wild. Once you have that gateway inside of it, now the world is your oyster, and you can customize training.
One of the things that Greg and I used to argue about in the service was there were loads of people who saw virtual, particularly, but in some respects augmented, as a way of just doing operational training on the cheap rather than actually being better. And there was always that sense of, if we go back to the simulated world, yes, you can practice everything, but there wasn't that sense of jeopardy, that sense of fear. And I always use the example of Top Gear, Luna Seca race circuit, Jeremy Clarkson, he could do his Xbox, charge around that in record time. But when he jumped in the real car, he couldn't. And he said, actually, they're a really good simulation. But when the car twitches for real on the circuit, I feel this shot of adrenaline and fear through my body, which you don't get in a simulator. So
Right.
how do we make sure that it would be fair to say, I think, that augmented reality is still a bit clunky. How do we stop this being a sort of eroding operational training when clearly it's got massive potential for the future? But where is it going to suddenly spring into life where the technology can genuinely deliver game-changing operational readiness?
Yeah, well, I think there's multiple layers to that question, right? So the first part of it, I agree with you wholeheartedly. When you look at legacy approaches to training, we either fly pilots in airplanes against other pilots in airplanes. Supply demand kicks in. We don't have enough. It's not relevant, and we can't scale it and have it frequently enough. On the opposite side of the equation, your point, we put pilots in more advanced simulators, but exactly to your point, the point with simulation is it doesn't in any way emulate the cognitive loads that we're under when the human being is doing it for real in an airplane that will kill you in the blink of an eye if you're not in your game, right? We all know that. So precisely to that point, I believe, and I'm sure you guys do, that pilots need to fly airplanes for sure. The question is, how do we do that efficiently at scale, frequency, and to relevant platforms? And the elegance of augmented reality is exactly this. It affords us the opportunity to actually fly the airplanes for real. We are physically flying the assets, and that's a huge disconnect that people don't fully understand. We are flying airplanes, but now you're looking out into the real world and you're seeing digital content placed into the real world, which negates the need to spend billions of dollars, or sorry, pounds every year, failing to meet that demand signal. And as far as the maturation of the technology goes, innovation is hard, and there's bumps and ups and downs along the way, but that's normal. I think the technology is maturing at a rate that is far beyond that, which people actually realize. I mean, anything we've shown publicly is typically 2 years behind where it is internally, just by virtue of snapping the chalk line, spinning out a branch, and going to a demonstration. But also it's really important to do these demonstrations and fail and figure out where the edges are and refine the product. But the technology is coming really, really quickly. And I'm sitting here in Orlando. Last week I jumped in an airplane with another test pilot, We went 15 miles to the east of Orlando, entered the Straits of Taiwan, joined an eight ship of F-22s, F-35s, and some unmanned platforms, none of which existed, escorting a special operations MC-130 AFSOC platform into mainland China for an SF drop, fighting our way there through a 12 ship of J-20s, J-36s, and every SAM known to mankind. And we did that with two airplanes, right? And we're seeing AMRAAMs coming off the rail and you name it. That level of training I have never had in my lifetime, even doing high-end weapons employment support with the F-22 at Nellis. I've never had that level of training. It is fabulous training, and it's getting better and better really quickly. But to your point, I believe that pilots need to fly airplanes. The question is, how do we do that efficiently and realistically?
So Dan, I think both of us sat here can see exactly, and in fact, you painted a really good picture there. That description really brings it to life. You know, and I know that getting inside an aircraft these days system is tricky. The primes, their software, etc., and the helmets these days are an integral part of the airplane through helmet mounted sight, etc.
Mm.
And you might not be able to give us the full answer, but how challenging is it bringing in a system like this into a platform where getting inside the sensors and the systems is difficult or challenging?
Well, I think it's obvious that there are challenges to it, but I've always said if it doesn't defy the laws of physics, then it's really just human will that makes it work, right? So, but having said that, there are approaches to this problem, certainly over here on this side of the ocean, which you'll hear referred to as open systems architecture and open mission systems, which helps circumvent the ability to actually put it directly inside of operational flight programs. And probably that's as far as I can go with that. But there are means of doing it. The question is, do you have the will to do it? To the point on the helmet, it's a really nuanced question because the market will only tolerate one helmet, right? For sure. It's not going to have a helmet for training to enter AR worlds and then a helmet for operations. So the technology has to be able to do both. So this is the elegance of the solution of AR. In augmented reality, we're aiming to mimic human vision, and the demands of human vision are awesome. We're not obviously significant, wide field of view, full contrast, high resolution. A byproduct of doing AR well is that you can do helmet-mounted queuing, but 10 times better than incumbents or legacy approaches to that solution. The inverse does not apply. Why do I bring that to light? Because I believe, the single biggest lever in this or potential transaction that we're offering is that we are solving the training crisis of the future. If we can do that and, oh, by the way, deliver an operational solution that is far beyond anything on the market right now today, then it stands to reason that it makes a tremendous amount of sense financially in terms of quality of training, safety, you name it. The question is, do you want to go out and solve this problem? And if you want to go out and solve the problem, there is a solution sitting on the shelf that we can go do this. Technically, yes, it's difficult, but it doesn't defy the laws of physics.
I also asked on that same thing that Greg brought up, though, do you, as a stepping stone to this, I mean, one of the things that they do with the B2 often, the US are probably a lot better than we are at this. They go, we don't really have the assets to do as much live training as we'd like to, but we need the aircrew to be up and flying. So go and fly in a Hawk, or do regular training in a smaller platform. You and I both know people get a bit fixated about the aircraft. You can learn how to use the systems, but in terms of situational awareness, you don't necessarily have to be an F-22 to do that. If you had some sort of sexy helmet that actually allowed you to do this really grown up degree level training in a Hawk, do you see that as a stepping stone? Because then it'd be a lot easier to integrate. It'd be a lot easier to have your own helmet in it, because the Hawk helmet is a relatively cheap compared to the F-22, the F-35 helmets, which are $500,000 a copy, and I just can't see how they're going to be easily adapted. Do you think there is a stepping stone here through the training system that augments the front line as well?
Yes, I do. I think so. When you break the training problem apart, there are three distinct subsets of training problems, right? We have a production problem. I'm speaking from the US, but I know it's a chronic problem in the UK as well. So there's a production problem. We can't produce pilots quickly enough and get them through the training to the front line at the quality we need at scale. Secondly, there's an absorption problem, the ability to take those pilots, get them onto the front line and up to speed. And sorry, thirdly, there's an experience problem. So keeping that level of experience on the front line. So all the way back to the core of the question, I think the right route to market initially for us was exactly to your point. Let's focus on the production problem. So in the UK, to make it relevant to the audience over there, I mean, obviously there's a real problem at Valley with lack of availability of Hawks, predicated, I think, because of engine availability, I think. And so to the core of your question, yes, if you can take advanced technology and put it into a platform, do we need to be flying F-22s or F-35s every single day of the week? I don't think we do. And actually, if you look at the US and what they're doing, there's a program over here previously named Reforge. I think now it's the Stafos, I think it is. Exactly to that point, they're looking at taking a platform like the T7, which is largely software defined. And the thesis is if you can software define the cockpits and the systems and make it look and feel like a Raptor or an F-35, then maybe you fly the T7 3 times a week and you fly your Raptor once or twice a week, something like that, right? Augmented reality is an additional enabler beyond that as well, because it doesn't just bridge the span, or sorry, span the gap between the delta between a Raptor and a T7. It now allows you to go and interact with relevant digital content and threat environments that make sense as well. So I think you're exactly correct, and I think that is the way that actually training in the future will go.
So in terms of, I'm thinking particularly you have F-22 experience, and that's probably the sort of peak of all of this. Um, I think we're all a generation where we were worried about the pressures, omnipresent pressures on money. That's certainly true in the UK. I'm sure it's true in the US, despite the fact there's massive amount more money, but still you'll feel the burden here. First of all, what do you think the appetite is for this new technology? Because there's a lot of skepticism around technology, augmented reality, and that sort of future. We've certainly found that back in the UK. And the other question is, when I've looked into this, it does look like, given that you are able to analyze the pilot a lot more, it feels like part of your digital training solution is starting to tailor training to the individual pilot rather than a one size fits all. And that's important for me because my first tour was a QFI, a flying instructor, and you were taught how to teach, and that's the package you taught, and you shoved it down their throats. And if they didn't get it, you're not as good as me, therefore you're out. Whereas everybody learns differently. There seems to be something there as well in the training solution you're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. So two questions there. In terms of resistance and appetite, I think technology adoption generally follows a standard pathway, which is the law of diffusion of innovation, right? So you have your innovators that will just get out front, kind of like what we're doing here at Red 6. Then you have your early adopters, the guys that will stand outside an Apple shop in the rain for the next iPhone, and I think that's around about 15% of the market. And then you get your sort of the middle, and you have your sort of laggards at the end. It's completely normal. And so, yes, naysayers, of course, there's tons of them out there. I mean, if I listened to everyone in my life that told me I couldn't do something, I wouldn't do anything at all. So I just kind of ignore it. And frankly, I often use this term. I don't understand how people don't understand that this is coming. This technology, whether we deliver it at Red 6 or not, is inevitable. It's coming for sure. That's the first thing. To your point on training, it's a really important point. So I think you're exactly right. I think by virtue of the accuracy of the solution we have to create to draw to the pilot, it allows you access to a data set from the pilot that we've never previously had access to, right? So we can start to understand the cognitive loads on the human brain and understanding why human beings make the decisions they make when they're under duress. And so typically you sort of pass the problem apart as an instructor. You go, look, first of all, did you perceive the problem correctly? Yes or no? If you did you select the correct course of action? Yes or no? If you did, was it an execution error because you just suck at flying or whatever it might be, right? There's nuanced layers to, contributing factors and root cause analysis in instruction, of course. Inevitably, there's a degree of subjectivity in that with as instructors, as experienced as we get. But now, when you have access to absolutely objective data sets, including cognitive load, you start to understand why the human beings make the decisions they make when they're under duress. And if you can do that now, micro data sets built to macro data sets, and you can start to curate and customize training to the needs of the individual. And I firmly believe, and I've articulated that for years, I believe the future of training will be proficiency based. I don't believe it will all be, you'll all follow one syllabus. So you may have been brilliant at BFM. I was terrible at BFM. What may have taken you, I don't know, 3 rides took Dan 10 rides, for example. When we go back to the old Valley days, I remember coming into Valley on a Monday with a couple of classmates, and by Friday they'd gone right at the end of 4 years of training because the weather's bad, you get lost on a sap or whatever it is, and you run out of resource, right? There's a pool of resource putting all of these students through it. And I've often wondered, for the sake of 1 or 2 extra looks at a problem set, what the opportunity cost of losing those individuals was. And I don't know about for you guys, but for me, I didn't realize the full potential of what I was capable of as a pilot really into sort of into the OCU actually, when I had a really good ride and all of a sudden I got this shot of confidence and now my game changes completely. And I often wonder how many people we've lost for that. And I talk to that because if you can do objective progression based on proficiency, you're not just more efficient for the individual, but you're more efficient across a pool of resource, which is time and money and instructors and so on and so forth. So I think the efficiencies that you can glean from this data are enormous. And I think it's a really, really important point.
So Dan, just taking that just slightly a bit further, I mean, one of the things that really fascinates me is how this might work in practice in terms of either the physiology of it or the safety aspects. We've all seen comedy videos of someone in a virtual reality headset smashing the overhead lamp and falling in through the coffee table. But when you're mixing real and virtual, are there some aspects you have to take into account, particularly from a safety side of what's real, what's not real? How does that work in practice?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a very common question. I think really to me it's a very simple answer. The rules of combat or the rules of training apply whether it's digital or real as well. Now, there's all sorts of technical things you can put in there, like a kill switch. We push one button, it's all gone. But if you treat every asset as real, then the rules of combat or the rules of training just apply. You just treat everything the same way. The beauty of AR versus VR, and it's a really important distinction, is we're still seeing the real world. So you still see everything out there. So if we were going up and doing a 2v1 and I was a real airplane and I'm fighting, one of you's a real airplane and one of you's an augmented airplane. To me, it's transparent. I just treat you as exactly the same, right? It doesn't make any, I know it's hard to maybe comprehend that, but when you fly it once or twice, you just get it. It just the human brain sort of like jumps into what we refer to as the suspension of disbelief, and you're actually in it and you just operate as you would normally. The flip side of that argument, however, is, we train to the rules of combat and we have a 1,000-foot bubble and we don't do gunshots inside of I forget, it was 135 or something like that in the head. We're not gonna do that for real, right? For real, we're gonna shoot you in the face as we go past with zero separation on a bubble. And so actually the counter argument to that is you apply the rules of combat on a daily basis, but it affords you some really interesting training opportunities to fly combat in this example as you would for real, where you don't have a bubble and you're taking head-on shots and so on and so forth. So I think there's a tremendous amount of upside to it. But going back to the safety applications, you treat it as a rules combat, you treat it as a real entity. It's largely transparent. You have a kill switch so you can kill it if you need to. But honestly, the human brain acclimatizes to it really quickly.
So there's no issue as far as you see it on a single seat aircraft employing this. It doesn't need somebody in the back monitoring.
No, I mean I've got over 1,000 hours of test flying myself in this, and the other test pilot here is very similar. It really doesn't. It's you just treat everything as real entities, right? Obviously, as we're operating in MOAs and military training or free airspace, right? If there's civilian traffic out there and stuff, you've got to be cognizant of that as well. But actually, you can use this technology for things that people are not necessarily aware of. Like we have ADSB over here. I don't know if you have it in the UK, but it's a legal requirement now over here. We have the patent for visual ADSB, so you can turn that on, and you're penetrating a piece of airspace, and now you just look out and you understand where all of the traffic is using AR. It's a real SA enhancing tool.
Yeah.
Let's bounce back briefly to when you were talking about the training, and therefore, obviously, you're able to collect a lot more data on the pilots. The hugely positive thing about that is you can tailor the solution. The negative thing, of course, is that I think the point you made, which is absolutely apposite to me, is it's all about confidence. And we found often as not as instructors that you might have some guy who's really good, but you'd give him a really hard time because you need to knock his confidence a bit. And there'd be some guys who were a bit weak and you need to bolster their confidence. And there's a lovely line, isn't there, about Einstein? It's not everything a value can be measured, and not everything that can be measured is a value. How do we make sure that we keep that judgment in there? Because what you will see amongst your peers, you will know who's a good combat ready pilot. And it's not always easy to measure, but you absolutely know it when you fly with them.
Yeah, for sure. Well, look, I mean, exactly. It's it's part of a much broader conversation around like the advent of AI and unmanned platforms, right? I still firmly believe that human beings are a massive part of the future force structure, and human judgment is incredibly important. I don't think they're mutually exclusive things, right? Just because you're armed with absolutely objective data sets, it doesn't prohibit you from exercising judgment or nuance or empathy and all of the things that I think we should be showing as instructors when people are underconfident or overconfident. Sometimes you need to give them a smackdown, right? But sometimes to your point, a gentle whisper or a pat on the shoulder and stuff like that is works wonders as well. But I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think armed with objective data, you can still exercise human judgment.
And the other line, sorry, can I
Go
just
on.
pick up the one bit after picking up on what Greg said earlier, which was you were talking about the huge value that we used to have 1,000-foot bubbles, and that's fine, except come the good and glorious day, you're not going to respect that. I remember my first trip in Germany flying around in 2,000 meters visibility and the safety brief. And I went, it's 5.5 Ks, isn't it? And the whole room looked at me as if, look, Johnny Wet Pants, we're training for war. Just because it's not 5.5 K, we're still going to go. But I guess the point I want to is, yes, it must be fantastic to have a training regime where you don't have to respect the rules of peacetime. But how do you make sure that sense of jeopardy is also folded in there? Because if you know you're up against an augmented reality jet, there isn't any jeopardy. It's that I got to see how close I get, and there it goes. Whereas if there's a real jet out there, you and I have both been in a situation where you get rather closer to somebody coming at you than you really wanted to. That catches your attention.
I don't know what you're talking about. I've never done that. Yeah, but no. So I think in AR we strive for something called the suspension of disbelief, right? And so there are really look. I'll invite you guys out to Orlando. You come fly with us, right? I'll put you in the back seat of the airplane. I often do this with people. I'll put you in the back seat, and we'll go up and we'll put a tanker or an airplane up there, and I'll fly close formation on the tanker. And it is absolutely mesmerizing, right? But then what I'll do as an experiment is I'll put closure on and I'll start closing towards the airplane and it's coming towards you. I promise you'll react because your brain is tricked because we're creating something called the suspension of disbelief. And whilst you're outdoors and you're physically feeling the physiology of flying an airplane and all that kind of stuff, when something comes past you, obviously it's AR, right? We know that, but there is something that happens in your brain where you don't want to fly into it, you don't want to hit it, but it allows you to train to that. And it's really something magical about AR that does that, which is highly differentiated to VR.
You brought up a really good point there, because I can see a lot of people would say, well, hang on a minute, why are we just trying to make the pilot a little bit better? They're dinosaurs anyway, we're going to replace them. But actually, I mean, I think both the UK and the US are on similar paths here of hybrid operations where we're looking at operating with autonomous and or crewed at the same time. I can really see a value from this because I can't see how we're going to train with a CCA on a regular basis. We're not going to want to put them in the air, and we may not want to put them in the numbers that we might want to use in wartime. So it sounds like you're offering a solution that allows you to practice that CCA operation. In fact, it might be the only way we'll be able to do it prior to a war day one.
I think you're absolutely on the money. So I thought about this long and hard, and certainly as people have looked at my company over the years, as AI has become more and more prevalent and unmanned platforms has come to the fore, inevitably the questions you get is, you guys are not going to be around for much longer, right? Everything's going to be unmanned. I fundamentally reject it. I reject the premise. And I think there's a lot of nuance to the question and the debate. So, firstly, if you go into unmanned, I separate low cost, attritable unmanned platforms that we're seeing used in Ukraine to terrible effect. Right, got it. Right, massive place in the battle space. Although it's pretty horrific, but yeah, got it. On the high end, when you look at the high end unmanned platforms out there, I think there is a big delta between the rhetoric of what they're capable of right now and the reality, right? But let's assume they're perfect. Human beings are still going to be around for a very long time. So it's not whether human beings and whether unmanned platforms will replace human beings. The real question is how do human beings and machines work together to deliver synergistic effects and lethality? And exactly to your point, I think we thought a lot about how we might operate alongside these things together, but we thought less about how we're going to train. So then you pass it apart and you go, well, what is an unmanned platform? It's basically an aeroplane with an AI algorithm in the heart of it, right? I don't think we're going to buy nearly as many as people think. I don't think we're going to fly them every day for a whole bunch of reasons. I think we'll keep them in the box and use them when we need them. Or what is a risk-free way to train at scale and frequency and relevancy, both alongside them and against them? It's in exactly the same system inside of ATARs, inside of the synthetic world, where you can develop TTPs, where you can build trust and predictability, humans and machines working together. It's a no-brainer. So I actually think the advent of unmanned platforms actually increases the case and the demand for this technology. I think it is inevitably the way we'll train. That's before you even get into lack of airspace and regulatory environment and risk and all that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, I can see another use here. Maybe you guys are already there, but we've always worried about the ethics of unmanned uncrewed because there is no human in the loop. I can absolutely see a case where your CCA pilot is actually sat back at home with their augmented headset, being the human in the loop, but not actually being part of the platform. You can absolutely see how that might work too.
Yeah, I agree. I actually think if you think about long range kill chains as well, I actually think mission commanders of the future may not even be beyond the flot. They may be way back, using a combination of unmanned platforms and manned, but you may have an interface such as this that's sort of giving you that sort of beyond the flot SA, but you're not actually there yourself. I think I've said this often, but if you've read the book, I'm sure you have, or seen the movie Ender's Game, right? That was really the inspiration for Red 6. The mic drop moment at the end of that movie is Ender Wiggin wipes out an alien species when he thinks he's actually in a training and simulated environment, right? But he's actually doing it for real. And that was the driver behind what I knew I wanted to create with Red 6. Because if we get this right, as the technology matures, God forbid we have to go do it for real. The only difference is it's real stuff flying back at you. Everything else should be exactly the same. We should see it every day of the week in training. I really believe that pilots should only be flying blue air, and as this technology comes online, the provision of red air it's entirely possible to envision a future where it's delivered synthetically, and that preserves our assets. We're only doing what we should be doing for real. There's so much value here.
And I just ask you, I mean, mindful of the time, but if we had a bottle of wine on the table, we would be going on for hours on this subject. So, but given I think we're probably big advocates for this sort of capability, but yet it seems to not be gaining a lot of traction yet. Do you think that's because of technology? Do you think that's because of culture? Or why do you think it's not? Because it feels like this is enormous potential, but it needs to be embraced if it's going to reach that potential.
Well, it depends what you're talking about, lack of traction. I mean, I would actually argue that the contrary. We've got some really exciting stuff going on over here, but I think there's a natural pathway to innovation and technology, right? That it takes a while to do this. We've been doing this for 8 years now. We're one of one in the world, and it's difficult. It's not easy, but we see it coming, and it's coming much quicker than I think people realize. And I think if you watch this space for next year and what we're doing openly and maybe not so openly over here in the US, you'll see some really interesting stuff coming out of next year. One thing we've just announced publicly is a contract to integrate into the F-16, for example, right? So I don't think it's the case that it's not gaining traction. I think on the contrary. But what I would love, what I really want to do is when I started the company, I'm wearing both a US and a UK hat, right? I really want the UK to come along on this journey at the same pace as the United States.
In a way, sorry, but in a way, Dan, that's exactly my point. Is that we're sat here in the UK, we're looking at the defence review, we're looking at the fact that there is no money. Well, there's going to be more money paid in defence. It feels like operational training is very expensive, and we don't do it well enough. This is a much more cost-effective way of doing stuff, and yet. We've talked about a networked enabled training system, but we've never done it in the last 20 years. So we may be getting traction in the US, well done. But in terms of how on earth we gain traction in the UK and create something that we can potentially leverage into the export market. Because at this side of the pond, there's a whole load of Europe that want to play together. That feels like a tremendous opportunity if only we gain traction with it.
Yeah, well, look, I think there's conversations going on behind the scenes. I think we're making good traction. We put an initial demo into the Hawk that we're obviously divesting of the Hawk, and so we're watching. Let's just put it this way: we're watching the decisions for which the replacement aircraft for the Hawk, which platform you choose with interest, and I would just say watch this space. We have good relationships.
I guess it would be nice, wouldn't it, if someone was thinking about this technology as part of the solution rather than buying a platform and then adding it on an extra.
Yeah, I think it is, and I think that's really important. And I think a big strategic approach to thinking about that is really important. But for us, we're trying to lead turn this. We have good relationships with all of the would-be OEMs, right? So I think we're doing our part here. I think the UK really needs to embrace its entire strategic approach to training. But I think ultimately the market forces drive it, right? Supply and demand. You have a massive demand signal and a chronic undersupply compounded by a lack of airspace, advanced missiles, no place to train. If you can tell me an alternative solution, I'll listen. But I really don't see an alternative. And I think, I whether it's Red 6 or not, this technology is inevitable.
And when do you think, if you had the crystal ball, when will this conversation be history? When will it be? My son flies Typhoons, and when will it actually be completely normal for them to be using this on a daily basis?
I think in 5 to 10 years from now, we'll be starting to you'll see it proliferated for sure. Yeah, I mean, I know where the technology is in terms of like internal to Red 6 and how far along it is. I also know what we're doing over here in the US publicly and not so publicly. And it's coming. It's coming.
Well, Dan, it's been a huge privilege. Thank you so much for your time today. We could have carried on this for hours, trying to keep it on a sort of level, keep ourselves out of the secret environment. But having a fellow warfighter and talk us through that, it's been a huge privilege. Thanks for your time.
No, my pleasure. Great conversation. And again, if you get the opportunity to come over to Orlando, I'd love to put you in the back seat. I always say to people, when you see this, you can't unsee it, right? And it's coming. So you're welcome. Open invitation to both of you.
Fantastic. I could see Sean's eyes prick up as soon as you said that.
Well, Greg, that was quite frankly a fascinating interview. I lots of things that came out of that for me. First of all, I do think there's an inevitability that the march of technology will bring this, augmented reality to life, and it'll be scary, but it'll happen in day-to-day life. You'll have glasses on, and suddenly a dinosaur will come out of your dining room wall and stuff like that. But you can see some huge potential for training exercises to make this work. I guess the challenge is twofold for me. Is the technology ready? And also, culturally, are we ready for this sort of training yet? What was your take on that interview?
Yeah, really good questions. And I think, we obviously pressed down on the technology and the ability to insert this into a very complex platform that will have all sorts of proprietary software, etc. So the day of open system architecture is not here yet. Culturally, the youngsters joining today will be totally au fait with this because it's what they played with at home. Whereas you and I were marbles and bows and arrows or whatever it was we played with. These kids are used to virtual reality or augmented reality. So to them, it's instinctive. And I think there's a big difference here. If in your and my day, we were all fearful of the people that said simulation will replace everything because of the things we discussed right at the beginning of this podcast. But this isn't about replacing live flying. This is about making your live flying 100% valuable. And who wouldn't want that? And so this is not something to be frightened of. It is definitely something to embrace and consider how it gets introduced. But I think that technological challenge of inserting into the cockpit, because although Dan was very right to talk about the visual fight, the ability to see things and let you eyeball anything sort of 40, 50 miles and inside is becoming realistic. But how do you have that augmented visual aircraft also showing on your radar so that you can cue the two? So it's going to be, that is obviously the challenge, but I cannot see why you would not want to be able to do this.
Yeah, and I think he alluded to that, didn't he? And I think America sounds like they're more advanced than we are in terms of looking at adopting this. I think for me, part of the challenge was if you got sort of if you focus on the training areas, you can afford to put your own helmet in place. You can afford to integrate it a lot easier. And in fact, at Valley, there's similar sorts of things starting to be done. I think there were a couple of points for me, one of which was I was out last night with a senior RAF guy, and he genuinely believes that this is the future. The only thing was, he said, and he agreed with Dan really, the technology isn't quite there yet. He can do it, but what Dan kept talking about was suspending belief. And to do that, the artifacts that you look at have got to look like real artifacts. They've got to interact. They've got to move properly. I remember watching, was it ABBA? Have you seen that ABBA show in London
Yeah,
where,
no, I am under pressure to go. So yeah.
yeah, it's weird. I don't want to see it again, but it is weird because it isn't them. It's computer generated them, but you can tell it's not them, but it's pretty good. And you sort of get a bit of almost suspended belief that you've actually been transmitted back in time. And in a way, the artifacts in the real world, that the injected reality needs to conform to real. And at the moment, it's not quite there yet. And it doesn't mean it isn't of incredible training value. And I think Dan said 5 to 10 years before it is. But I do think there's an inevitability that this is coming. The challenge is how do you embrace it early so that we're ready for that onslaught?
Yeah, and there may be a phased approach here. I'm not sure whether Dan hinted at this or not, but he did talk about some of the programs they were clearly looking at. So we're looking at a renewal of MFTS, military flying training. We're looking at a replacement of the Hawk. If you're not factoring this into your thinking about how you might train the pilots of the future, then we're going to miss a trick, because if we then bring in an old system that operates in traditional ways, we'll have missed the opportunity to bring in this technology. So I think we should be looking at this type of thing for that. And then you do the really difficult bit, which is get it inside the F-35 and the GCAP. But with GCAP, it can be designed in from the outset. We're at an early enough stage. F-35 would be interested to see how easy or difficult that is. But if the US are doing it, then we can almost jump on the coattails. So yeah, I think there probably is a phased approach, but I can absolutely see, and I know the first time we ever went to the tanker, it was real, and it's a big aeroplane and there's stuff going on, and you go, oh, wow, if only you could have experienced that, prior to that, it would have taken a lot of the sort of fear out of it and a lot of the unknowns out of it. So yeah, you can absolutely see the benefits.
Did you also, because I think I was also impressed by him talking about how we prepare for wartime scenarios, and that's one that caught your eye, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, his little vignette there of taking somebody into the Taiwan Straits and literally seeing Chinese aircraft, for real. Um, that is exactly what you're looking to do here. Now you can do some of that in the simulator, but as you and I said, that's not the same as handling the airplane with all those other things going on. So there's a blended solution here that sort of does a little bit of everything and allows you to be. I mean, if we go back to Red Flag was created because it was reckoned, or it was a fact that you had most of your casualties in your first 10 sorties. It was where you learnt on the job, and if you survived for a very long time. If you didn't survive, it was because you were inexperienced. So Red Flag was designed to create those 10 sorties before you ever actually had to do them, and it did work. I think it did toughen us up. It did make us more mentally aware of what we would face. And this sounds like that you can do that every day, not once every couple of years.
Yeah, and I think it is inevitable. I was quite excited about that. Also quite excited about the fact that we are constrained by peacetime risks in everything we do in peacetime, yet that's absolutely not what we're going to do for war. When he was talking about the 1,000 foot bubble, you and I doing dogfighting training or your low level stuff, you want to get as close as you can to them because every bit of space you create between you gives them turning room, and you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But of course, peacetime means you've got to be somewhere away. The opportunity to get really up close and personal, doing a sort of red arrows synchro cross in the middle is exactly what you want to do. The trouble is you don't want to do that the first time ever for real at war.
Yeah.
Because there'll be lots of other things that are involved in that. So I see some huge potential here to break that risk paradigm that we're locked in during peacetime and enable us to train more closely to what we're going to be doing in war.
Yeah, I agree. If you remember, there was that the computer versus the pilot competition that they ran in the US, and the machine won more often than not because the machine didn't play to the rules. It pointed and shot the aeroplane head on. The pilot was so used to creating that miss distance and not pointing in the front sector that they weren't doing it. Now, so we're going to now ask pilots to be able to do that. But no, if you're in a game and it's quite immersive, when you get shot, there's a thud of going through your control or whatever. If you're going to start pointing at aeroplanes in the sky that are augmented and then get very close to them, how do you not stimulate the body in the same way? That's quite frightening. So yeah, there's some really interesting dynamics here that are going to be at play, but you can absolutely see the benefit.
Well, I do think, culminating this is that we're really looking at this for the Strategic Defence Review, where's air power going and the like, and are there technologies that could be game-changing technologies that enable us to get more out of our aircraft, but also potentially into the export market to help grow our economy. This feels like it's one of those capabilities.
Yeah, and I think what's really fascinating is Red6 is not a big company in traditional terms. So this is a classic innovative SME. How do we create the space and the opportunity for them to thrive while still buying big expensive platforms in the traditional way? So I think this is going to be a really good test, actually, of how you really do something quite difficult, but absolutely value terms in terms of capability on top of just buying the equipment.